USAID sees climate change impacting Africa by adding additional stresses to the stresses that Africa already faces to achieving its development objectives. Increasing temperature is already causing failed germination of certain temperature-sensitive crops like maize, but more erratic rainfall in rain-fed dependent agricultural areas, increasing burdens of disease on people, but also animals, crops, changes in pests that are going to affect those crops. Those will all challenge the institutions and the people across Africa to sustain the gains that they've already made, but also to continue progress toward their development goals. Temperature is very clearly related to climate, and so temperature is already affecting maize, coffee, other kinds of crops. But water is also critical, and water is impacted by many more things than just climate change. So really doing an integrated assessment that helps us understand how climate change is impacting the things that people value, but also how other stresses come into play is very important. In designing programs to respond to climate change, USAID has the Climate Change Initiative, which is a US government effort. It supports dedicated programs to both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also support countries to adapt to the impacts of climate change. In addition to the initiative, the USAID Climate Change and Development Strategy highlights the importance of integrating climate change across much of what we do, whether it's food security work, health, disaster risk reduction. In the area of adaptation, we think that building capacity of countries in 3 areas in particular will build lasting gains, and that's improving access to science and analysis for decision making, that's strengthening governance of climate change adaptation responses, and that's designing and implementing adaptive strategies that will help people deal with the impacts that they face and really adjust what we're doing so it's better suited to future climate. Also, when we're in the field designing programs, we allow people first to identify what it is they value, development objectives that they can agree on, and the inputs to those things that are important before we introduce climate change. Because in that way, once climate change becomes clear what it means, they can see how it touches the things that they value, the role that they have to play in adapting, and the role that others play in helping them adapt to climate change. When you analyze problems from an integrated perspective, you solve that mainstreaming challenge. And so we're working on that through the multi-year country development cooperation strategies that USAID designs as an entry point for integrated assessment and mainstreaming of climate change. In Africa, the agency is also focused on improving understanding of climate change vulnerability. A lot of problems, as I mentioned, are related to both climate change, but also human stresses. And so teasing apart what's related to climate change and what's not helps us use these scarce resources more wisely. To identify the areas most affected by climate change, this is far from an exact science, and mostly because vulnerability and risk are not national phenomena. They're highly local and context specific. That said, we use the relevant national statistics where they are useful, as well as expert judgment on a number of factors. First, physical exposure. Certain countries are more physically exposed due to their locations than others to climate stresses. Sensitivity of the economy and the people to that exposure, basically. Rain-fed agriculture is a good example. Adaptive capacity of the government and the people. Is there an effective sort of institution to identify the risks that are emerging and take action? Willingness of the country to engage with the US government, as well as diplomatic and geographic considerations, as well as harmonization with other donors and other activities. I will say, though, that once the country offices are programming their resources, we encourage them to look at the most vulnerable populations within their countries. So whether that's women or other disadvantaged groups, how they will be impacted, and try and focus activities to help them. Some of the innovative programs that USAID is supporting, one is a comprehensive risk management approach through this R4 Rural Resilience Initiative in Senegal, and USAID support to this World Food Program project in coordination with Oxfam America looks to work on all of the ways of reducing risk that we can through community-based risk reduction, whether that's soil and water conservation projects that people can engage in, improving access to credit so that they can take measured risks to invest in their livelihoods, improving savings to buffer against small changes in their incomes, as well as insurance. So it's an interesting approach to see what we can learn from utilizing a number of risk management options. Another working with local governments in Mozambique, strengthening the capacity of city governments that are in coastal zones to deal with the impacts of climate change. And finally, we're working on the information side. So FuseNet is the Famine Early Warning System, and SERVIR is a geospatial information program that we run with NASA. And these both seek to deliver the right information in a timely manner to people who can make better decisions. In the case of FuseNet, that's early information about famine conditions and the potential for food insecurity that people can use in an anticipatory way to reduce the incidence of crises. In terms of results on the ground, most of our projects are just getting started now, but what we seek is development outcomes in areas that are sensitive to climate change. So ideally, it won't look a lot different than what we were trying to achieve in the first place, but whether it's food security that's sensitive to changes in weather and climate or health, those are the objectives that we're trying to achieve. We have an early moving country in Asia where we saw families that employed adaptive strategies to deal with flood actually fared better in the last recent flood event. So that's promising.